Dr. Jennifer Breyer is a professor in gender and women's studies and history at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And the thing that I really want you to know is that her research and teaching are focused on the historical intersections of gender, race, and sexuality. Her first book, Infectious Ideas, U.S. Political Response to the AIDS Crisis, came out in 2009. And she thinks about AIDS as a lens through which to see the complex social and political history of the 1980s and 1990s. So that kind of tells you why Jenny's up here. She is an incredible public historian, and she co-created the award-winning exhibition out in Chicago on LGBT history in Chicago at the Chicago History Museum, and Surviving and Thriving AIDS, Politics, and Culture, a traveling exhibition for the National Library of Medicine, and I'm Still Surviving, a living women's history of HIV and AIDS. So, Dr. Jenny Breyer. And then, literally, a man who needs no introduction. Okay, done. James Lapine, living legend, national treasure. We're so lucky. Oh, that was really it.
Full disclosure, James has known me since I was about 2 months old, maybe, yeah.
She hasn't changed a bit.
Yeah, so this was a really just an amazing opportunity. I've never seen this play until Angel Izagirre asked me to write a piece, and Gabby to write a piece for the program. And then I realized that I couldn't write that piece until I talked to you. And so I'm wondering, James, if you could start by telling us like when you got to New York and what it was like for you to get there in the 1970s.
Well, it was great. Listen to what every old person says about the old days, but it was just, for me anyway, a very burgeoning time of artists and people and thinkers, and I was always living downtown where you could get share a loft, and everything was affordable, and there was a sense of freedom about it. The Vietnam War was, beginning to come to a close, and there was just a sense of liberation, I would say, and certainly open sexuality, and certainly the gay world was opening up as well. But it is a long time ago. I could give you specific stories, but I don't think I will. Maybe later.
Maybe later. Maybe in the after party. So how did the first act of the play come to be?
I was just starting out in the theater, as was William Finn, and there was I'll try to make this short, a theater that was being started way over on 42nd Street, which was the old strip joints in New York, and one of the theaters took it over for a legitimate theater, and they asked a bunch of people to work together, and I had done a play there, and Bill Finn had done a musical there, and the artistic director put us together. And Bill had started writing March of the Falsettos, and we only had 3 songs, and in those days, Andre Bishop, who ran the theater, said, well, I'll give you a rehearsal room for a month, and you can put it on for a month. And it was just that simple, and we had 3 songs, which we started. And Bill, as you can probably tell, in the music is wholly original, somewhat crazy, terribly disorganized. And he would admit it. And I had a very, logical way of thinking. So that's how we worked together. We just built a story together, and the boy was my invention because I said you really need one normal person on the stage who's not neurotic or crazy or, you know. So that's, Jason came into the mix, and we had really just put it on its feet, and it didn't really come together till the absolute last moment, and people arrived, and there was a new critic at the New York Times who came and saw it and just said it was like nothing he had seen. So that's how it began.
And who was the critic?
Frank Rich was the critic. Yeah.
And that March of the Falsettos, the first act, is it much different in the play than it was originally?
No, it's pretty much what it was. Yeah, I had never done a musical, so I didn't even know about how to do a musical. But I would just put these index cards on a wall, and he had these 3 songs, and then we started telling our story, and I said, well, he just sang a song, and she just sang a song, so now we got to give this one a song, you know, and then it was like, well, what are they going to sing about? And it kind of built its way around that, and wouldn't it be nice if they all sang together? So we'll put a card there, and, you know, that's kind of how we did it, and then the last song was the first song in the first act of, or in the beginning of March, which was the guy standing and sort of saying, this is what the story's going to be.
When we talked a couple weeks ago, we talked about what Marvin is like.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what this sort of, what it was like to write this, to be in this play, thinking about gay liberation in this moment, and just to sort of set the stage. The play is written before anybody knows. I mean, HIV as a virus was traveling in people's bodies in the 1970s, but people didn't really know that.
No, the 2 acts were written 10 years apart. So that, you know, but Bill is an openly gay man and wildly eccentric, and Marvin is Bill. And so it was very autobiographical in that way.
Yeah. And we also talked about this, and it does, everybody sucks in their breath when Marvin slaps Trina.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what that family dynamic was for you?
For me personally?
Well, or just for you. I mean, you can if you want. Or
well, it was kind of scary when that Bill created that moment, and I think Bill had a somewhat complicated relationship with women. He was extraordinarily close to his mother. But it was a very dramatic moment, and I can't remember what it was based on anymore. This is quite a long time ago. But it would get a gasp every night from the audience, and women in particular. But what's weird about the show, not just looking at it tonight, was how it switches tone. It's kind of so wackadoodle, and then all of a sudden it's a little less wackadoodle, and then all of a sudden it's like real.
Yeah.
And I think when we first did it in a very tiny theater, nothing this big, it was just very impactful because it was so different than what people were used to, and also a sung-through musical where there's really no dialogue at all was kind of unusual. You know, I was thinking, watching it as an elder, one's imagination in your 20s, our 20s was so, how would I put it, uncensored. You know, we had nothing to lose. It was just a lark. We used to, you know, drink beer during rehearsals and smoke dope at the end of the night. And I choreographed the whole show, but I did it at night after all the actors left, and I had a bunch of pals come in, bought a couple 6-packs, and we just kind of like, oh, you go there, and you know. And the scenic designer kept saying, well, what are we doing? I said, well, go to the basement. Maybe you can find a couch or, you know, a chair. And I said, put them on wheels so we can sort of figure out where they go. And so that whole production was, it was wacky. It was just furniture on wheels in this tiny little space. They were throwing the furniture at each other, and it was a kind of a wackadoodle affair.
The first act is definitely, they feel so different. You feel the 70s, and then you feel the 80s.
Really, even though they're only 2 years apart,
right.
Actually chronologically.
Well, that's actually what I wanted to ask you. So I know there's a reason why you only go to 1981. Obviously, Jason couldn't have a bar mitzvah much later than that. But you started imagining the second act when?
Well, almost 10 years later, when AIDS was really in full bloom.
Yeah.
And we wanted to do something. And we thought, what would those people that we wrote 10 years ago be like today? Or what would this impact have been? So that was just the simple impetus of it. Can we go in a room again with these people? And we added a lesbian couple. And can we create what their lives would be when they were first exposed to this, what would become, a horrific time for gay men in particular.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you can remember in your life your sort of first memories of what would become AIDS. Not for the play, but for James.
Well, I remember it very well. I had a friend and an agent who was the first person who got sick, but nobody ever talked about what they were sick or what it was. And I had worked with him and another fellow and a woman. We had all done my first play. And so we went up to the hospital to see Louise, and when you walked in the hospital is when the shock, everyone was in hazmat suits and signs were all over the place. Everyone was so petrified that you could get it just by being in the room. Are you sure you want to go in there? And that became obviously very immediate then. And he was in denial, or certainly never talked about it, but it was so obvious to the three of us who came to visit him, oh, this is what's going on. And what was so striking about it, a friend of mine, Stephen Graham, who had got the money to produce the show, brought a little paper bag, and he brought a little tin of caviar, and he spooned it into our friend's mouth. It was one of those images you never forget. And he passed away very shortly after that. And he was not out, and he was Puerto Rican, and his mother, it was really a hugely dramatic moment for those of us who knew him and were close. And I think that's what happened to a lot of people. They just eventually, it came into their lives, and in New York particularly at that moment.
I am fascinated by the way memory works in the play, because the writers, the directors, the producers of the play are remembering a different moment. And then I wonder what it's like for those of us in the audience who lived through the 1980s, like that is it taps into a different memory for us. And for those of us in the audience who didn't live through that time, they have other first memories of what AIDS means. And so I'm curious to hear you talk about Falsettos as an AIDS play, as an AIDS musical. It's before Angels, it's before, right?
Well, I mean, what's thrilling about seeing it tonight is it's telling the story to people who don't even know the story at this point. And I guess sometimes I think what I do in life doesn't have much import, but I don't know if that's my own feeling. But sometimes I remember that something like this actually lives on and will keep some piece of history alive. I think most of us who lived through it, have our own personal memories, like I was talking about. But I don't know. That when COVID came around, it was a kind of reminder for those of us who went through the AIDS crisis. But that was, obviously wildly different. But there was a sense of fear that was there.
Yeah.
And so many gay people were not out in those days. It was, it was not really. It was, and some people didn't want to be out. They loved the underground part of it. But that was very hard for families that did not condone people who were sick, and of course the religious right,
Right.
saying it was God's will, etc.
Yeah. Before we open it up for questions, so if people have them, start to get them in your mind, I do want to ask about the lesbians.
Do ask it, please do.
As one, I thought maybe.
Well, then, by all means.
I love.
Do you love?
I
the
love
lesbians?
them. I
yeah.
do.
Oh, that's so good. I thought you were going to say you weren't going to love.
No, I love
them.
them.
You did.
And I think I said this to you, but for me, the song that I can't get out of my body mind is the Four Unlikely Lovers.
That's extraordinary.
It's an extraordinary song.
Yeah, and Bill wrote it for a lesbian couple that he was very close to. Put the characters in, and that song is a killer. It's just a beautiful, beautiful song.
Yeah. I told you, I have a child with my lesbian wife and his two fathers who are here.
Oh, cool.
And the thought of what it means for the kind of families you created in this play. There are so many different kinds of families.
Right.
And it really prefigures what I think it's hard to sort of imagine in 2024 how radical it was to do that, even in 1990, to really talk about what it means to have a chosen family, what it means for a child, a young Jewish middle-class child, to have 4 parents.
We didn't think about it. We just did it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, we're going to do this and show people that. It was in the world we were living in, and Bill just had a very, very close lesbian couple, and he wanted to write songs for lesbians. So, and bring them into the story. And what's so great about it is having the kid in that world and being such a kind of kid with no prejudice, and I love that about the show itself, and how much he loves both those men and the women. So it's cool. And his mother maybe a little less, I don't know, but he'll get over that when he's older, and that'll be great too.
All right, I'm going to open it up to the audience. Please.
Should I stand up?
Yeah, stand up and use your theater voice.
I used to work here for.
There you go.
Shows, so I'll give you a little bit of context before I ask the question, but I wanted to touch up a little bit and kind of answered it a little bit when you looked at COVID. So the context is. I was one of the first and worst cases of COVID in Chicago, and I was in the hospital for 73 days.
Wow.
And I had to be intubated the whole 9 yards. I was in the ICU for roughly 2 months. So I guess my question is, what do you see? What were the differences that you noticed or that you saw, or what were the mirrors that you saw between the AIDS crisis and the COVID crisis, and what were things like on the outside? Because I've never really knew that much.
Well, I think during COVID, first of all, I'm glad you're here tonight. And, you know, I think of that a lot when I see people with masks and running, you know, that there were those people who were at the beginning of the COVID epidemic and before we knew what its consequences were. And I knew some of those people too. So, you know, I think the big difference is in COVID, people hunkered down when they heard there was COVID. At least I live in New York, and that was my experience there. Everything shut down. I mean, it was very dramatic. And I think AIDS was so much more complicated in a way because it was transmitted sexually and not in the air. So I don't think COVID had the same judgments made about it that AIDS did in its day, but I don't think we're sadly done with epidemics, and I think they're going to come around and around. And yeah, I mean, it must have been an incredible shock when it came into your lives, and as well. But it didn't. People could protect themselves from it, which was somehow with AIDS, it had already spread when it was too late to do anything about it for certain people.
I would also just say that we are living in pandemic time. We all have been living in multiple pandemic times. We are still in the time of AIDS. We are still in the time of COVID. And I think it's important. I mean, there are a range of ways to answer that question. There will be dissertations and other things, and absolutely more stories told. But I think it's important to really name that things are, we may not be in a crisis, but we are still in these times. These are the epidemics and the pandemics that, frankly, will define our lifetime. Whether it's those two or Mpox or something else that we don't know about yet. I think the reality is that part of what, you know, you don't see in falsettos, I mean, what James was talking about, like what it was like to go to Bellevue in 1982. And people would have food outside of their doors because no one would deliver food to people. And so the scene where the lesbians deliver the food, I mean, that's a really powerful thing because that didn't happen. And I think it's just important to sort of understand that we are the only thing we have to get through these things. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is John, and I just wanted to express gratitude for you, for both of you, for your for queer storytelling, for education, and for bringing this, for sharing it with the queer community. And just as a serendipitous side note, I was here with my friends. They picked the 14th to come and see Falsettos, and it happens to be the anniversary. I lost my boyfriend at the time, 24 years ago, to AIDS in a hospital, and it was a great way to celebrate his life and the life of those we lost. So it struck me it was surprising, Mr. Lapine, that you said, you know, would people remember the work that I did? And I want you to know that that's just part of it in celebrating and telling that story over and over again, which is important. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for two.
Okay, 1, 2.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't look over there.
I'll be quick. Mr. James, when I was like 19, I found Sunday in a Park with George, and I lost my mind, and I've yet to find it. I've yet to find it by...
How did you find it?
YouTube. Dude.
YouTube.
YouTube. Don't tell them. Don't take it down. But,
No.
But
thank God for you two.
I think your mind is a fascinating place, and I thank you for being such a fascinating thinker. I have like a tiny two-part question to ask you about this play. How did you and William Finn develop the world of this play? Like, what were the conversations around that? And then how do you, as a librettist and a director and a writer, tease songs out of composer lyricists? Like, what was that? Because you spoke about it a little bit, but like, what is that process of like teasing these things out of people?
Well, the last question about how you make a musical, basically, is usually starting with a story, a book. In this case, there was no book, but I would write things out for Bill. And then, well, this is so unusual. It's really an opera, it's a little opera. And but when you're writing a regular musical, you have to know why people are singing and why they're not singing. So in some ways, it's easier to do this because everybody's singing everything. But once people start talking to each other and then they break into song, it's like, what's going on here? So that's sort of the challenge of a musical. And in terms of inspiration or imagination or something, which is a question I get a lot, I have no idea. I mean, I want to say I have no idea, but I think every writer or every creator or everything is just different. I mean, I like to tell people I had 2 brain concussions when I was very young, and one of which I kind of went in and out of consciousness for a little while, and so that's how I can inspire. I dream a lot, and a lot of things are going on in there I don't even know about, but I just go with them, Yeah.
And then this last question.
Thank you. Hi there. My name is Amanda. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm sure we all really, really appreciate it. One of the themes of the show that jumps out a lot to me is masculinity, especially like growing up and kind of figuring that out for Jason. So I think the question I have is, how has our sort of social concept of masculinity kind of grown and evolved since you wrote the play, especially in conversation with queerness?
I'm not sure I think this question is beyond me. There's a bunch of shrinks up there that I happen to know that could probably really give you some information on that. But I do think you bring up an interesting subject of masculinity, particularly now as genders and everything is becoming so fluid, and it's being redefined in certain ways, and I think also calcified in certain ways as well. And I look at it with great curiosity because I don't understand it in a way, although I understand the fact that we have male and female parts of ourselves. I think everybody does, although some have more one or the other. And then there's those guys, that just don't want to recognize that female part of themselves. But I think that's changing a lot, or already has changed. And I don't know. I think you should talk to that because this is the woman with the PhD.
I don't know. You can call me Doc, right? The first time I listened to the play a lot and was reading, and then I watched on YouTube one of the performances at Lincoln Center. At first, I thought that the first act really had a patriarchy problem. So I think for me, it was less about masculinity and more about patriarchy. And the way Marvin sort of, Marvin is loathsome in the first act. I mean, he's loathsome. And I think he is.
Oh. I think loathsome's a little intense, but...
All right.
No, but he's unlikable,
he's
for
unlikable.
Sure.
Okay, fine.
For sure.
Fine. He's unlikable. And something happens, he becomes something else. He becomes a father. He becomes a partner. He becomes more human in the second act. He lets go of some of that, what we would today call toxic masculinity.
What would you call it?
Toxic.
Toxic, yeah.
That's what the young people call it.
Okay. Oh, well, I'll make sure I don't say it.
But there are so many other men in this play, in this musical, right? And they have a really different way of operating in the world that I think is worth thinking through. And the difference between Act 1 and Act 2 is pretty profound.
Well, yeah, because we also wrote it 10 years later.
10 years later.
Yeah. But, you know, Bill's a wild card, and Bill's, as I said, extremely close to his mother, but I've known other men like him who have just complicated feelings about women. And the moment when we wrote the song where he slaps his former wife was, we knew, going to be really intense. But it's a kind of thing an actor has to do where they finally push, well, not the actor, but the character pushes himself and pushes till it explodes.
Right.
For him to finally see who he is and what he's done. And we all probably know somebody like that. And that's why I think it's an interesting show at the end when he does that, and that song, I Never Wanted to Love You, you know, it almost comes from the same emotion as love, somehow complicated in there, where I think he probably loved his wife and wanted to love her, but he was gay. And the frustration of it all somehow came out on her, and then he turns to the boy to try to make things right in that final song. It's complicated and interesting.
Yeah. I agree completely.
But I do agree that he's an unlikable character.
Unlikable.
Yeah, and which is, you know, don't ever write an unlikable leading. You know, I mean, that's what you have to find the humanity in your main character at some point. Otherwise, you know, it's why did we sit there and watch this creepy guy?
Well, as I said, the lesbians save the day.
Yeah, we should have put them in the first act.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.
Yay.
Welcome to Falsetto.